Why do so many intelligent children end up feeling trapped, disconnected, and completely alone in adulthood? During childhood, they seemed to be ahead of everyone. They were often praised, treated as promises of a bright future. Teachers referred to them as above average. Parents were proud, classmates looked up to them. But somewhere along the way, this promise turned into pressure. The constant praise became a silent expectation, and that expectation became a burden. What was recognition became an invisible prison. Many of these adults who were once considered prodigies now face a blockage that is difficult to understand. They feel unmotivated, out of place, and even emotionally backward. They find it difficult to start a project, maintain consistency in something, or build deep bonds with other people. This happens even in simple situations, like finishing a book, organizing the house, or replying to a message from someone they like. Not out of laziness, but out of a strange feeling of internal paralysis. And the most confusing thing is that, on the outside, everything still seems to work. They have a good vocabulary, they can solve problems, they demonstrate competence in conversations. But on the inside, there is a disturbing emptiness, a constant feeling of being on the fringes of their own lives, as if they were watching the world happen for others. This disconnection doesn't arise by chance. It arises from a subtle mechanism of identity construction. Children who grow up being called intelligent often end up associating their personal value exclusively with intelligence. They become addicted to the recognition that this characteristic brings. And that's where the danger lies. Because anything that deviates from this script, every mistake, every failure, every doubt, begins to be interpreted as a sign that something is wrong. It's as if you're no longer allowed to stumble. It's like the child who always got a 10 at school, and one day, when they get an average grade, they feel like they've let the whole world down. It doesn't matter if it was just once, or if everyone around them makes mistakes all the time. She internalizes the idea that she can't fail, and this follows her into adulthood. This turns any challenge into a threat. Instead of embracing the process, they start to avoid it. And this is just the beginning of a deeper cycle that traps those who once believed that being special was enough to feel whole. This is how identity begins, with something simple, straightforward, and easy to understand. A child sees themselves as someone who loves video games, who loves hot dogs, or who draws in the margins of their notebook. These innocent labels are natural, part of development, but few of them carry the weight of being called intelligent. That's a compliment that sticks. It becomes more than a quality. It becomes the basis of personal value. As the child grows up, this identity is reinforced by everyone around them. Teachers treat them with more expectation. Parents proudly compare them to others. Colleagues expect the right answers, speed, and solutions. Gradually, the child stops feeling smart. They need to be smart all the time, because that's what guarantees affection, admiration, and belonging. And what seemed like a gift begins to shape their choices and their way of seeing the world. For a while, this feeling of superiority is comfortable. The child understands things easily, learns quickly, gets good grades without much effort. While others have to study for hours for an exam, they take a quick look and get almost everything right. But there is a hidden cost. The praise didn't come because she tried hard. It came because she got it right first time. What was valued was not the effort, but the lack of it. And this sends out a subtle but powerful message. To be intelligent is to get it right easily. This belief, internalized early on, creates a silent dilemma. If I'm really smart, then nothing should be difficult. If something is difficult, then maybe I'm not as smart as everyone thinks I am. This thought becomes a constant noise in adult life. You try something new, but if you don't master it quickly, You feel exposed. Frustration stops being just a natural obstacle and turns into an identity crisis. So, to protect yourself from this, you start to avoid these moments. You don't raise your hand in a meeting unless you're sure of what you're going to say. You avoid getting into debates, even when you have something to contribute. You refuse an invitation to learn something new for fear of feeling incompetent. And this is how, without realizing it, your life begins to narrow. Your choices start to revolve around what you already know how to do well. You opt for predictable paths. You only try activities in which you already have an advantage. You avoid any and all scenarios where you might look like a beginner. Even simple things like learning to cook or signing up for a dance class are seen as risks to your self-esteem. The child who grew up being told they were special now lives in fear of not living up to expectations. And this limits not only what they do, but who they believe they can be. You stay in safe territory, repeating what you've already mastered. You avoid taking risks. You avoid making mistakes. You avoid appearing vulnerable. And that for a while works. You keep your image intact. You look competent. You feel safe. But life, unlike a math test, requires exposure, trial, and error. While others experiment, test ideas, fail, and learn, you shield yourself. You create a shield that protects you from shame, but also cuts you off from the world. Gradually, the comfort zone becomes a comfortable prison where everything is known, but nothing is new. It's at this point that isolation begins to take hold. Not for lack of ability, but because you've stopped putting yourself in situations that promote growth and connection. After all, the real connection between people doesn't happen in perfectly articulated conversations, but in shared experiences. Playing ball at the weekend, embarrassing yourself at a dance class, getting lost in a complicated project with other people. It's in these situations that bonds are formed. When you avoid all this for fear of not looking brilliant, you miss out on these moments, the ones that turn colleagues into friends. You don't join a running group because you're out of shape. You don't accept that invitation to a new course because you're afraid you'll be the worst in the class. You'd rather watch than participate. And without realizing it, you start to feel like a spectator of your own social life. But the desire for connection doesn't disappear. It just changes form. So you turn to what you know how to do: observe, analyze, understand. You start trying to predict people as if they were equations. You learn to interpret expressions, predict reactions, find emotional patterns. And this creates something known as cognitive empathy. You rationally understand how someone feels. But it's like watching a movie with the sound off. You see the scene, but you don't feel the vibration of the music. And as much as it seems like you're interacting, deep down you're just protecting yourself. You analyze like a psychologist, but you don't get involved like a friend. Gradually, even social interaction becomes more of a performance. You rehearse what you're going to say before you leave the house. You calculate the right moment to enter a conversation. You avoid silence for fear of appearing uninteresting. Even simple things, like lunch with colleagues or a phone call with someone close to you, start to require effort. And not physical effort, but mental effort. As if every interaction were an exam, a test you have to pass. Not in order to be accepted, but in order not to be exposed. And that exhausts you, because living like this means being on alert all the time. And no mind can stand that for long. This approach even works for a while. You develop the ability to navigate social environments. You manage to do well in interviews, meetings, and even casual encounters. Sometimes you even seem charismatic because you've learned the right gestures, the right tone, the words that work. But all this comes at a high price. You're always playing a role. And behind the performance comes exhaustion. Because while others are just living, you're calculating. While your colleagues are chatting lightly and spontaneously, you're analyzing every detail. What was said, what wasn't said, what you should have said. Gradually, even the pleasure of being with other people fades away. Socializing becomes one more task where you have to do well, one more field where you can't fail. And like anything that becomes an obligation, you start to avoid it. You go out less. You turn down invitations with polite apologies. You answer messages late. You drift away a little at a time until loneliness stops being a passing state and becomes part of your daily life. You even try to solve it rationally. After all, your intelligence has always been your tool. So you start thinking, reflecting, writing. You make lists of reasons why everything is fine. You put together strategies to deal with insecurity. You read self-help books and watch motivational videos. But nothing really seems to work. The reason is simple. You're trying to fix emotional pain with logic. And logic, no matter how sharp, doesn't get to the root of insecurity. The doubt that hurts the most, am I enough? Doesn't dissolve with arguments. It only dissolves with experience, with vulnerability, with acceptance. But how can you make room for this if you've spent your life running away from this kind of discomfort? For those who have always been praised for being smart, emotional growth is often the least explored territory. While you developed quick thinking, learned to argue and solve complex problems, you neglected the art of feeling, of dealing with failures, of asking for help. And when the pain hits, the ego builds the last wall. It whispers that you're just different, that no one understands you because you think too much, feel too much, perceive what others ignore. And so you begin to isolate yourself even more, not by choice, but out of defense. Not because you really believe you're above it, but because it hurts less than admitting that you feel below, lost, out of place. This mechanism is called defensive arrogance, and ironically, it's one of the most subtle forms of suffering, because it keeps you away from others even when you need closeness the most. It doesn't shout, but it sabotages. It doesn't protect, it only postpones the encounter with what really matters. The humility of being imperfect, human and yet worthy of connection. Defensive arrogance creates a thick wall between you and the world. On the outside, everything seems under control. You have answers, educated opinions, a rational stance on almost everything. But on the inside, there's a growing distance between what you feel and what you show. And this distance prevents a real connection from happening, because in order to be seen authentically, you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. You have to be honest, even when you're confused, insecure, or afraid. And for those who have grown up trying to maintain the image of someone admirable, this is an almost impossible task. The way out, however, begins with a simple step, not easy, but possible. Abandoning the smart kid identity. It's not a question of denying your ability, but of stopping putting your self-esteem in it. Because when self-worth is tied to performance, any failure becomes an existential threat. You stop looking for challenges, not for lack of interest, but for fear of seeing the image you've created of yourself crumble. Pride becomes more important than progress. You even want to grow, but as long as it doesn't involve making mistakes. And since all growth requires going through areas of discomfort, you end up stagnating. To break this cycle, you need to build a new foundation, an identity that is less rigid, less defensive, and more in line with the reality of being human. Instead of asking yourself all the time, how can I look smart? You start asking yourself, how can I continue to develop? This small shift in focus has a profound impact. You stop protecting an ideal and start living a real journey. You allow yourself to try something new, even if it seems silly. You start a guitar lesson even if you can't play a note. You try a new recipe even if the dish is bad. Take part in a conversation even if you don't know if it will be interesting. These small, ordinary gestures are the true signs of emotional courage. It's strange at first. It even feels like a step backwards, as if you were leaving something precious behind, but it's actually the opposite. It's the first step towards a fuller life, because when you stop trying to be exceptional all the time, you start to realize something fundamental. Your value never had to depend on it. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room to have something to offer. You don't need to have all the answers to feel accepted. Being human, after all, is enough. And that includes growing up slowly, feeling lost from time to time, not knowing exactly what you're doing. What really matters is to keep moving, even with uncertain steps. Because every small advance that comes from honesty is worth more than 1,000 successes that come from the fear of failure. You can grow slowly. You can stumble. You may feel confused, lost, overwhelmed. There's nothing wrong with not knowing what you're doing at all times. Real life doesn't demand perfection. It demands presence. And even if you've spent years hiding behind an image, you can always start again. Not with grand declarations or crazy plans, but with small, human, imperfect, and honest steps. If you feel stuck, anesthetized, or emotionally distant, maybe you're just exhausted from maintaining an identity that no longer serves you. And here's a truth you may never have heard clearly. You don't have to keep being the smartest person in the room to deserve to be there. You just need to be someone willing to show up, even when you're insecure, even when you're afraid, even when you're not sure about anything. You start by letting go of the story you've been repeating. You give up the need to appear brilliant, and in return, you start trying to be real. Taking part in a conversation without knowing if you'll shine. Try something new even if you have no guarantee that you'll get it right. Trusting that, by stepping down from the pedestal of invulnerability, you'll find something more valuable than the admiration of others, real connection. And when you allow yourself to enter that place where others live, the place of shared imperfection, you discover that you are not alone. You never were. You were just hiding behind your armor. And in that place, you begin to feel something that has long seemed unattainable, belonging. Not because you stood out, but because you finally decided to come closer. And if, at any point in this video, you recognized yourself on this path, if any phrase touched a blind spot or translated something you were feeling and couldn't explain, please leave a comment. Share your experience. You can be sure that you're not the only one carrying this weight in silence. If this content has helped you in any way, like the video and subscribe to the channel. This shows that it's worth continuing to do this work, and if you want to contribute any amount, your support makes all the difference. It strengthens this channel and allows more content like this to reach those who need it. Because, just like you, other people are also trying to break out of this invisible prison. And maybe this video is exactly what they've been waiting for to take the first step.